Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to this second day and third session of our study course on interpretation of statement. Yesterday we had two good, very interesting sessions, and today we will be continuing with the third session. Today's first session is on some very fundamental important concepts. Like when you read a section, there is a heading in the section. So what is the importance of the title? What is the importance of the subtitles thereafter? What is the importance of the provisos which are there in each section? Then what are the schedules? At times there are some schedules which are to be referred. So what is the importance of that? These are basically internal aids which are available to interpret any particular statement. Similarly, there may be some external aids which are dealing with some fundamental concepts, some legal case laws which can be used in interpretation of a particular provision. So those things will be discussed in this session. Subsidiary rules, then headings, titles, etc. Then we have non-obstant clause, notwithstanding anything, etc. So what is the importance of that in interpretation of that particular provision? And some general words which are used, how they are to be interpreted. These are the things which will be discussed in this session. And for leading this discussion, for speaking to us, we have an eminent personality in the form of Sri S.D. Srivastava. Sri S.D. Srivastava is the CITDR at present at ITIT Mumbai, and I am very glad to share with all of you that yesterday evening only he has been promoted as now Principal Commissioner. So he will be now Principal Commissioner.
I think I'm very lucky because this first session that I'm going to meet all of us as a Principal Commissioner. Last night at 11, the Government of India issued the orders because 2 officers are retiring today. So the order had to be issued at 11. So I think you all are very auspicious for us. Thank you.
And sir was just telling me that I was just telling this is his first assignment, though not official. But he said no, this is also official. So we are feeling that we are feeling proud. And sir is considering this assignment also as an official assignment. So we are really thankful for you the honor. Sri Srivastava has joined IRS in 1986. He has passed LLB from Delhi University with distinction and was placed second at the Delhi University examinations. He was, prior to joining IRS, he was also pursuing LLM. He is an LLB of course already. As CITDR, he has got various landmark decisions to his credits. A few of the special bench decisions which has been argued by him have been successfully argued. The very famous...
I just interrupt, and which may not keep you very happy. First is Daga. When you do that working, that was all the hard work as a lawyer I put in, because as pointed out by Mr. Vajani very correctly, I was actually a lawyer. But when I was doing LLM, because of my marks in law, my father encouraged me. He said, if you take the civil service with law, I don't think it will be a problem. And my first choice was income tax. And why I say your importance? Because of Mr. Palkhiwala. I had heard him in the Supreme Court once. So when it comes to choosing a service, others go, I thought it could be only income tax if I was not getting IAS, not even police or anything. So that is why I am very happy to be here amongst all of you. Tax practitioners. That is what motivated me when I heard Mr. Palkhiwala arguing Lohia machines in the Supreme Court. Capital employed.
So as I was saying, he has been instrumental in getting many special bench decisions in favor of the department. One in the case of Daga, as he rightly mentioned, one is Came Invest, and one was DL Securities. Yes, those decisions might be against the associates, that's fine, but that remains. So we don't have anything.
No, but one interesting thing, they are all pending. Either in the High Court or the Supreme Court. So that is it.
No, the point is that when you have to learn, the knowledge does not have any side. It's the question of whether it is assessee or revenue. The knowledge has to be, the knowledge will take its own course, the law will take its own course. It does not have any side, and therefore there is nothing wrong in appreciating the point and the effort which he might have put as a DR. Because at times the difficulties of DR also, when we argue the matter, we have got one matter on our hand and we prepare for one matter for 2 or 3 earlier days. And these PRs, they have 20, 30 matters at times on their hand, and they put a lot of efforts to argue those 30 matters, and which is coming on daily basis. So it's certainly a difficult task which requires a lot of caliber and efforts on their part, which they have been putting. And as far as Mr. Srivastava is concerned, I am fortunate that we have such DRs in Income Tax Department, Tribunal. I distinctly remember one case which I was arguing and the sir was arguing on the other side. I very well remember that the law was in my favor on one point, and he was generous enough to point out to the bench himself that this is the point which is in his favor. And in fact, he was assisting me in coming out to the correct conclusion. So, such a DR is always an asset to the tribunal as a body. With that, sir, again, very welcome to this course of interpretation of statute. We were really fortunate in the last session of 2013 when we had this. Sir has been with us and he was a speaker at that time also. And we have repeated the same speaker because his talk was such a mighty talk at that time that we thought that for this topic we should not have anybody else but him only. And he was readily agreed to our accept our invitation. We are really thankful to you for that, sir, for continuous support. With that, very few words, let me present before you S.D. Srivastava and request all of you to carry up with our order. Before sir addresses, I would request President Parliament to please offer a memento to Shri Srivastava as a mark of love and respect.
I greatly value this because coming from tax experts, it has more meaning. And, thank you so much.
I would request Shri Srivastava to please.
Well, first, very good morning to all of you. And I must first very quickly express my gratitude to all the learned members of the tax chamber consultants for giving me this occasion to actually just exchange thoughts. As pointed out by Mr. Vijani, I joined the service in '86, and prior to that I was doing my LLM. In fact, my guide was very perplexed. He said, "Why are you joining the bureaucracy? You remain in the judicial this thing." And but be that as may be, I left. I had done 1 year and I had to only submit my thesis in Delhi University. Even in LLM, you have to give a dissertation. Only then you can go in the second year. So then I thought I should be fair, and that is what I will now call Mr. Daniketan Bhai and all of us, that what he said in the tribunal, all of us are officers of the court. So you should be fair. You may not like the decision, but the reasoning is very objective and you should be fair and point it out. So in all fairness, I gave that place to another eligible candidate who would have been in the wings for LLM, and I came and joined. And the interesting thing about income tax, I'll tell you, is that there's a very famous quote, why it is so intricate for Abraham Lincoln. Because Abraham Lincoln, it is said, never lied in his life. The saying in the US is that he was so straightforward. But then there's a joke to it. They say why he never lied is because A, he never played golf. In golf there's a tendency to underwrite your score. And B, he never filed a tax return. Because there is a tendency to understate or overstate the deductions in a lighter way. So that is what makes income tax very interesting, that it is intellectual, I can say, battle. And coming very quickly to what we are doing, and I believe I read you did mischief rule yesterday, that doctrine of purposive interpretation as it is called. Now, very quickly I'll tell you that we, and this is in an intellectual forum, so I'm not speaking for anyone. Australia was so quick to realize the importance of the mischief rule that in section 2 of the Australian Income Tax Act, if you go in the interpretation clause, they have written it so well, so clearly, that for the purposes of this section, the principle, for the purposes of this act, the principles of purposive interpretation shall apply, whether stated or not. See, this line is very important, whether stated or not. Meaning thereby that they have given an indication to the judiciary that when you are interpreting the provisions of the Australian Income Tax Act, keep in mind that the principles of purposive interpretation shall apply, whether the object is stated or not. Now, actually, we argued this in Daga. Why? I'll tell you very quickly the importance of interpretation of statutes. It is actually the pathway, it is the highway to reaching a conclusion in a judicial proceeding, because otherwise it becomes an English essay. If you do not use these tools, then it is only a prose, it is only English essay. It is these factors which apply, like the rules of internal aid or external or dictionary meaning, when it is to be needed, when you will refer to the parliamentary history, when you will not need it. Why? Because there is a presumption that whatever Parliament had to say has it been said in the Act itself. Why are you going behind it now? So things like this. So the importance of principles of statutory interpretation arises from this, which I got out from the Australian Income Tax Act, that they have made it very clear. And just for a moment to take you aside, but it's of interest to all of you, in Australia in '86 they had the same problem of Vodafone. The Vodafone one, capital gains. That, it's a very famous case, you can Google and see it, Lamesa, Lamessa. Now in Lamesa also the same problem came. That this was a Dutch company, through some American invested in Australia, and Australia is rich in iron ore. And later in Holland also capital gains is exempt. And this company was registered in Holland. And they did the same thing. When they sold off, and the Australian Federal, they call it the Federal Income Tax Authorities, asked them that what about the tax? They said no, the share is registered in Holland. So we will pay tax there. And when they found out there was no tax to be paid, so there the Australian Income Tax Authorities assessed them on the same theory. But the Australian Federal Court held otherwise. They said no, the source versus residence. So the residence will matter, not the source of income, and it is registered in Holland, where if it is, they will pay. But in Australia, public opinion became very violent and strident. They said no, this is making a fool of us. And in a joke, someone said, we may be fools, but we are not such big fools to allow this few thousand millions of Australian dollars to go out. And you'll be surprised, actually, someone could have said this to the Indian public. Because of the public opinion, Australian Parliament felt obliged to pass a retro amendment. They had to amend the law retrospectively. They said, no, we will not permit this to take place in our country. And the company was made to pay the debt. Though they came in for criticism in the rest of the world, but they held firm. They said, no, we do not permit it. So that is one way of looking at things. The other is what we are seeing now, that we don't want to appeal Vodafone to. That is fair enough, because the concept of income does not include capital. That is when you will do inclusive, means and inclusive, exhaustive or inclusive. So income tax is very fascinating. What is that Duke of Westminster principle? That always applies, that a man is entitled to arrange his affairs so as to attract the minimum incidence of taxation. But then the line between avoidance and evasion is very thin. That is for the courts to decide. So if we come very quickly to what we have to start with today, we'll do it. And why? Because I'll be very frank, this is needed when you have to give your expert opinion to someone. After all, when an investor or a taxpayer comes to you and takes or solicits your opinion, he wants to know what would be the fate of the transactions that he is going to undertake. And you would advise him based upon principles of law and decided case law. So the statutory part of it we can do, and it's interesting. I've tried to keep it to income tax only, and it's not publishing, sorry, it's someone else's. Keep it here. It's alright. And like today, we've been told subsidiary rules, mandatory and directory provisions, harmonious and beneficial construction. So, see, as the name suggests, let's just do first harmonious. The principle of law is that Parliament does not take away by one hand what it gives by one. So, this is the root of harmonious construction. You cannot read two provisions of an act or a provision to collide head-along. So, you must read it harmoniously. That is the golden rule of harmonious construction, that each provision of an act cannot be read to collide with another head-along, or to negate or to render it superfluous. Because if you read one provision in such a way as to make the other superfluous, then there is a conflict which Parliament does not intend. So the only way to read it together is to construe them harmoniously. And I'll give a very simple illustration from income tax which will keep you interested. That when in the special bench of Daga, which is cited as 312 ITR 180, and remember one thing, you must read it because a lot of, not that I argued it, both sides argued it very powerfully. There were 3-4 eminent counsels who came from all over India to argue it. The principles of statutory interpretation are discussed. Now, the issue there was of harmonious construction was that when the assessee has incurred the payment of interest on shares held as stock in trade, which is his business income, how you would disallow the interest under 36(1), isn't it? Because revenue was contending, by live case law I'll show you what is harmonious construction, that look, if you have an exempt income, then because of 14A insertion, you will not be able to get any deduction. Now the SSE was contending, and rightfully, that look, I have my shares as stock in trade and dividend is only incidental because I did not offload the shares and the due date, as in the records of the company, my name appeared, dividend was declared, I got it. So you will not disallow the entire interest expenditure because that is relatable to my business activity. I have taken loans, I am going to pay interest and invested it in the share. So in a business, that is how you match it. Now, if you notice the phraseology, 36 is other deductions. So you see, now this is important for you, that becomes your marginal note. What you see the importance, we argued, and it is there in Daga. Read it in the majority opinion of Mr. Sayal and Mr. G.C. Gupta. The first is the minority opinion of Mr. Singhal, after that is the majority, that we played up on the word other and harmonious construction. I said if you allow him the entire interest there, then you are rendering 14A superfluous. It does not talk of intent or motive. The section doesn't. It just says you should have exempt income. So naturally the answer came was that it will be harsh. This also you will find in Daga. Last is that equity and taxation are strangers. They may not be enemies. Remember, this is a very famous quote. They are strangers but they are not enemies. So you should give scope for this. So see, in a live example, then the only way to do it was no. Because the word is other deductions, so this will only come, it is residual. From the marginal note we took it out. So first you disallow under 14A by using the three methods ABC, which is now prospective, assessment year 8-9. So let us not get into that. 8-9, how would you disallow? So, and it is good, do not agree with me because it is in the High Court, it will go up till the Supreme Court just now. But the principles of statutory interpretation were used. That how will you, when there is an ambiguity, now remember the pillars are very clear. When the clear words of a section, they are unambiguous, they are clear, there is no scope for anything, they will govern. But whenever there is some ambiguity or some interpretation or some guidance is needed, you will refer to the head note or the marginal note and the chapter in which it is placed. Now where is 14A placed? Just below heads of income. So the intention of Parliament was to place it above everything else. Otherwise it would have come in the computation of business income or computation of income. So they placed it there, just below heads of income, 14A. And 36(1) says other deductions. So other is residual. It does not mean on the same footing as 14A. And this is only grey area. So it is interesting. Someone can come out with a better answer, and then in the High Court it will be a different discussion or arguments. So this is the importance of principles of statutory interpretation, that the government or revenue could contend very forcefully that if you see the word other, other assumes importance, other will be always residuary, give primacy to 14A, make the disallowance there, and if anything remains, then give him the benefit of 36. So that is in a straight practical application. I have told you what is the importance of these two, and harmonious. Because if you read 36(1) in isolation, then 14A is wiped off. And more important, what you did yesterday, that when a section is inserted by an amendment, then the Hayden's rule comes. What was the law before? What is the remedy that Parliament had intended? And this is the most important line. It is the duty of courts to suppress the mischief and enhance the remedy, and to suppress subtle inventions. This is the main thing in Hayden's rule, subtle inventions. So we showed to the court that this is a subtle, a very fine invention by the taxpayer. So please do not allow it to go through. And that is why you see how evenly it was fought, that it is a rare thing that the Vice President went in a minority and 2 members disagreed with him. They did not sign the opinion. The rule in tribunal, it's very interesting, is the senior most member will write the order. That's called a draft order. And that is circulated. Then the members either write, I agree. And now see, when it went to the other member, they said no. Then it went to the third member. It was special that even he said no. So then the rule is actually that the senior member has a choice. Either he falls in line with them, then it becomes only a majority opinion. Or he says, I hold to my opinion. We cannot find common ground. Then the other 2 say, we hold to our opinion. So that is how his opinion, though his minority is at the top, but the other 2 agreed and they wrote the majority opinion. And in our jurisprudence, minority opinion has no value. And this I must say with utmost respect, because sometimes, and I'm open, you find senior counsels quoting it. Now don't mind it, it is against professional ethics. Never quote a minority opinion. See, we are all responsible citizens of a very great country. You don't need Obama to remind you that you are a great country and that you have an Article 25. We all know that we are a very great country with a very old civilization. What I am trying to say is, you should mention it, that there is a minority opinion. It has no meaning in a court of law, because the majority opinion is the law. So why I said, because it's my duty. I've had the privilege of working now 4 years, and I always praise the Bombay Bar. I consider it, without being exaggerating, the best bar in India. That is why I always enjoy coming here. So we have done in a very straightforward how the conflict between 2 sections in the Income Tax Act which you deal with got resolved by the principles of harmonious construction, and by reference to the marginal note, other deductions, and third, by reference to the mischief rule also. That when a section is inserted by way of an amendment, and the last line I should have said, you cannot interpret a newly inserted section to make it stillborn. You should make it effective. After all, it has been brought in to remedy some mischief. And the mischief was from Rajasthan warehousing. Because what is the principle of law? That if you have an exempt income, you cannot claim any expenditure. Why? You will get a double deduction. A, no tax on the exempt income. B, expenditure to be set off against a taxable income, thereby reducing the taxable income. So, the rule of law is, no parliament ever intends a double deduction unless expressly stated in law. The decision is Escorts, 199 ITR 43. Likh lijiye. Because this is how you can advise your clients also, that there, if you remember, he got a deduction under that special 32 whatever it is. Then he said in depreciation also you give it to him. Then Parliament, Supreme Court said no, you can't take a double deduction. If you have taken it there, then though the statute does not provide for it, we will interpret it to mean it was not intended. Otherwise expressly. So leading cases Escorts, 199 ITR, page 43, that principle of law is a double deduction is not implied or intended unless expressly provided. And the second point in this was your account, because I'm a lawyer, the matching principle. What is your matching principle? Current expenditure and current income. Now suppose you have no income or an exempt income, then how will you take the expenditure? So actually 14A, interestingly I'll tell you, need not be written. We are all auditors. Can you sign a statement of accounts of a company or an entity which tells you or you find as a qualification that he has claimed expenditure of an exempt income against the taxable income? You will qualify. So 14A is only by way of abundant caution. Even if you don't write 14A, your duty as statutory auditors or as auditors is to qualify that. That here the accounts stand qualified by this amount of expenditure, which is in fact not related to the taxable income, but is in relation to a exempt income. So that is the way. So harmonious construction and this. Now coming to mandatory and directory. These are two words which are used, may and shall. Now the understanding in law is that when may is used, it will be directory. But when shall is used, it will be mandatory. But sometimes the section is worded such that if you read this simple English understanding, it will become against the purpose. It will become, or as they say, lead to some absurdity. So when the results lead to absurdity, the golden rule is only then this rule gets diluted. And we will come to this. I'll just refer to this thing, mandatory and directory. There's a very famous case of some shop hours being this thing. And one request, there are a number of good books, but probably this GP Singh is, I think, standard. Though there is an English book, Maxwell on the Laws of Interpretation. But for all tax consultants, I would suggest, and there's a later edition, this probably is one of the best standard works on principles of statutory interpretation. So, GP Singh, Principles of Statutory Interpretation. This is it. He was a Chief Justice of the Madhya Pradesh High Court, and his book is considered to be standard on this. So mandatory and directory is just, I'll take a minute from here. What I just said, and I just wanted to say, because when I need it, I keep my book underlined, so I know where I can pick it up from as a lawyer, because as I said, we have more cases to argue. But now, simple English, that what I said was, the use of the word shall raises a presumption that the particular provision is imperative, means you have to follow it. But this prima facie inference may be rebutted by other considerations, as I said, object and scope of the enactment and the consequences flowing from such construction. There are numerous cases where the word shall has therefore been construed as merely directory. So what I am trying to say is that just because Parliament uses the word shall, it is not conclusive. If you look into the object and the consequences that flow from reading shall as mandatory, then you have to dilute it and it becomes directory. And sometimes the reverse happens, where may is used, which is directory, it becomes mandatory. And actually there's one judgment of Justice Hidayatullah which explains it very well. We used to do it, I'll just see, it is here. The word shall is ordinarily mandatory, but it is sometimes not so interpreted if the context or the intention otherwise demands. And there's one case I wish I had. Just tell. Okay, one is because I should tell you you will need some sections of the Indian Evidence Act also, particularly if you come into litigation in the tribunal. One is section 114, the court may presume. If you remember section 114, and our friends who appear in the tribunal will find that revenue uses it. Why? Because there are two illustrations, F and D. A, B, C, D comes first. So D and F, which are of use. D is that acts which have been performed by the officers of the government, the presumption is they have been performed in conformity. Why revenue raises it is in 148. What happens in some 148 proceedings after GK Diamond Shaft, and if you do not give the reasons, then the whole proceeding is void. Because of Bombay High Court, the Goa bench, Savera Hotels, I think. There they said that the AO forgot to give the reasons or did not give the reasons. Later they wanted to rectify. The Goa bench also said no. If you did not give it at the stage during the pendency of the proceedings, when he asked for it, the assessment will be disputed. So revenue used to earlier take a plea from section 114 of the Indian Evidence Act and the illustrations. A to F are there appended, and the D is that official acts have been done in accordance with the requirements of law as it is. So this is one case where the word was taken to be that it is for the court in its discretion. Why? Because there may was used, and the assessee or the other person wanted the court to say that you should presume. Then they said no. If there is rebuttable evidence to show that this was not followed, then the court need not be bound by this, and for reasons to be recorded by the court it will. So this is only indicative. So you have to see two things when you are trying to interpret the word. Use shall or may in a statute. That will it reading it as mandatory lead to any absurdity or unintended consequences. Then the court dilutes it and makes it may. And vice versa, where may is used, and if you try and read it as directory but it leads to an unintended consequence, then you have to read it as shall. There are cases where you have that the officer may give a hearing. Now this is very interesting. There, because of the development of the rules of natural justice, may has been read to mean shall. That before you arrive at the decision, you must give him a hearing. And particularly if you see in 144A, when the matter is referred to the additional commissioner and he decides to take a view which is adverse to the SSC, then he has to give you a hearing. But if he decides to take a view which is in your favor, then he need not. You cannot go and complain that even then you should have heard. So there it is, see the purpose and the distinction. If the decision is adverse, SSC, hearing is a must. If it is in his favor, you can dispense with it. Whatever is referred to you by the AO, whether you agree with the AO or not is secondary. And better still, you will find in 50C. The best example, and the Jodhpur bench decision IT80, which all of you refer to when we come. There, for the benefit of everyone in 50C, it is that you take the stamp value, or if the SSC produces a valuation report, that was the grey area. So the courts interpreted no, then you shall take that valuation report into consideration and refer it to the governmental valuer, take that opinion and then confront the SSC with it. The officers were doing just the reverse of it. The moment they got a case of 50C and the stamp valuation was more than the declared value, irrespective of the valuation report, they would proceed to make the addition. And the judicial balance is maintained by that if the DVO gives a value even higher than the stamp value, that will be ignored. Then the stamp value becomes final. So the use of the words may and shall is fettered by the object and the consequences that flow from reading it first as mandatory, as the section says, and second as directory. So this would be the cardinal rule for acha. Just see.
I'm hearing, as you said, that C.B. Gautam under 20C Supreme Court says that hearing C.B. Gautam under chapter 20C. Yeah.
Now, one more thing, please. Same word, same meaning. Now, best I'll give you a live example. I was in Delhi the other day. We are arguing a special bench, and it's very interesting. 14A in the normal or statutory profits, and how you interpret it in 115 JB, clause F. Now, if you just see the act, in clause F, act is here, just clause F. 115 JB, one explanation one, and then clause F. The word used is for increasing the expenditure or book profit by expenditure relatable to. Now, here it is relatable to, and in 14A is in relation to. Now the fight is, I'll tell you very quickly so you enjoy this, that two tribunals have taken the view that book profits following Apollo Tyres, 255 ITR 273 Supreme Court, you cannot touch. It is as prepared by the assessee. That is the whole purpose of having a book profit, that AO cannot tinker with it, the accounts as shown to the shareholders and as given to the registrar companies and etc. But there are two other views. One is this RB share broking. It's a Bombay bench decision of the tribunal, followed in Godrej Agrovet or something by Mr. Sanjay Garg. And this is Mr. Sayal's decision. I had argued. Now there the word used is relatable to. Now if you see, relatable to is not defined in the act. And it says as increased by. Means whatever are your book profits, if you see clause F, it's very easy, you will get it. Explanation 1. F. The amount or amounts of expenditure relatable to any income to which section 10 other than that is 1038 or 11 or 12 apply. And what it requires is, provided that while preparing the annual accounts including P&L account, as increased by, explanation 1 says, for the purposes of this section, book profit means the net profit as shown in the P&L account for the relevant previous year, prepared under subsection 2 as increased by. Now, how would you do this? This is the thing. Now, you have the Delhi bench and another, Getz Industries, but that has now been overruled. You can read by Delhi High Court, 361 ITR 505 Getz. They have said he can make an adjustment of 14A in the book profits. Delhi High Court. 361 ITR 505. It's the latest decision. They overruled the tribunal. But now coming to this issue of same word, same meaning, this is what we are contending. That if in relation to has been defined in 14A judicially by Daga Special Bench and others to include direct and indirect, then even in book profit, this is for everyone, even in book profit, please understand it in the same way. This is very interesting because the assessees contend that then what is the difference between a book profit and a normal profit or a statutory profit? They contend that alright, it is very ingenuous. You do it under 14A, we have no objection because of Getz in India now, 361 ITR 505, but not 14A 2 and 3. Why? Because 14A 2 and 3 is notional expenditure and the theory of real taxation applies. So you cannot do it in book profit, which is a very good argument by the taxpayer. You can do it in normal profit or statutory profit, we don't mind, because it is placed there below heads of income 14A. And the rule is, this is a self-contained code, MAP 115J. Starting from the first time it came in 97, then came as JA, now it is JP. So it is a self-contained code. Now the issue is, see now how the section says net profit as prepared and increased by. So revenue contains this. Net profit has to be based on accounting policies and accounting standards. Then as increased by this expenditure. So how can this expenditure be different from the expenditure which is flowing from accounting policies and accounting standards? So a live example, same word, same meaning. Because in 14A, now it has been judicially held by not one, by, in fact yes, latest was Walford, 326 IPR, Supreme Court, that they said you disallow proximate and direct expenditure. Then they went on to say that even indirect expenditure is proximate. Like if you have common accountancy or you have common this thing. So now you are saying that indirect expenditure is also to be disallowed. Walford 326 IPR, Supreme Court. And then Godrej 328 IPR 81, Bombay High Court. Both of them, so same word, same meaning for the participants is that when there is a word which has already been defined in the act, then the rider is only one thing, unless the context otherwise requires. It should not be repugnant to the context. Then it will take color from there. Now, if you apply this test, it helps the revenue. Context is the same. What is it? Exempt income. So, to show you how evenly the fight takes place, I shouldn't use the word fight because it comes on TV, the big fight, so I'm using it in that sense. But it is very interesting. Law is very interesting. That is why I said this is a very interesting principles of, that is how we have bound them. Otherwise, if you don't follow this rule, same word, same meaning, then taxpayer is free. He will go by the concept of book profit and say that I am not going to account for indirect. I have not incurred it. How can you put it notionally into my accounts? Only by actually this principle. Same word, same meaning.